a textbook, and that is resource, right? I mean, I don't think that any experienced teacher should feel compelled or required to use a textbook page 1 through page 273, okay? But I do see a lot of merit in having that resource when there are things right there that are beautiful things that will really help me as a classroom teacher make my kids what they need to know and be able to do. Now, what I'm about to show you here as soon as I can project is a district that did find, in their professional judgment, a really well-constructed resource. They use it pretty literally, so I'll show you what they did, because I think...
So here's the dongle.
Oh,
I'm
yep.
sorry.
No, that's okay.
I'll put this here, you can put your computer on, or just take
slide
it. And,
over here, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
of course.
Okay.
So we should
Here we
be
don't
able
lose our
to...
connectivity there.
Yeah, that doesn't really screw
That's
in
okay.
well. So,
That's all right, we got it.
okay.
Okay,
I'm gonna hit the light too, if
yeah,
that's
why
okay.
don't you? Why don't you? What you're gonna see in their proficiency scales.
You hit the
This
what?
is Spanish
I
one,
have to
by the
shoehorn
way.
myself into the snow.
But
Otherwise,
what
I'll
you're
look
gonna
at it.
see in their
one's
proficiency
for big
scales
guys,
is
huh?
they followed the exact same template on every single one. What is in blue and red is what changes. And that's the basic knowledge. So you can see the left-hand side, which is in blue, they identified where they're going to address vocabulary. The right-hand side is the content that in this chapter, in their curriculum resource, they will be addressing. So you see at score 2, it's all simple content. Identify phrases related to likes and dislikes, phrases related to likes and dislikes with infinitive verbs. So that's the content that's being addressed.
Yes.
To be a score 2 student, they have to demonstrate mastery of those things. As opposed to every single one of their proficiency scales has this exact same language at score 3 and score 4. Apply correct sentence structure using the concept practiced. Apply relevant vocabulary in the correct form in sentences. Use correct grammar required by the concept practiced. So you will see that they have probably 8 or 10 proficiency scales. That doesn't change. What changes on their scales is the blue and the red. And then look what's at score 4. Make inferences about grammatical structures not explicitly taught that are related to what was explicitly taught. So they have to go further, obviously. So in chapter 1, you can see what they're addressing. Chapter 2, look, scale doesn't change, except right here. Personalities and characteristics, adjectives to describe people. Recall the present tense forms of the verb ser, complete a sentence with it, blah. So their score 2 is the only thing that changes, but score 3, they have to apply that every time.
So score 3 is pretty much just the standard, right?
It is. It's applying their understanding.
And then the standard transmits across different topics, or
The topics are defined in score 2.
Yeah.
And so their scope and sequence is very clear. They have 2 Spanish 1, Spanish 2, 1 Spanish 3, 1 Spanish 4 teacher in this high school. They also teach German and maybe one other language. I can't remember what. So then in light of this, their assessment looks like this. Let me make that a little bit larger. This is the end of unit assessment. So write the following words, write what the following words and phrases mean in English. Obviously that's score 2 where they just have that simple recall. Write the following words and phrases in Spanish. Spelling must be exact, accents and all. Write the following phrases in Spanish. And then we get to score 3. Write sentences stating what you do or do not like to do. And they have chosen at this point in time because score 4, they're not standards referenced reporting yet, so they don't have any score 4 on their common assessments. They do all of that as in-class activities.
Yeah. So this would be like a Spanish, probably level 1.
It is. It's Spanish.
So just to put this
Brings us
out
to our
there.
next topic.
Well,
So-
let's
Oh.
talk the resource first, because I
Yeah.
want
Okay.
to
Ask you a question about
Yes,
the
of
efficiency
course.
scale.
Uh-huh.
So, and I don't know the standards, and you guys will have to help me. But so that really gets to the speaking part of the standard, right? The ones that they have there. Is that correct? Is that where you would tie that? 'Cause you
Well,
have the
what we do is
culture-
we make
yeah,
three that
culture
can
and
do
presentation, right?
the can do statement.
We have
There's three
actually
standards.
written here presentational, interpretive, and interpersonal are the three.
Okay.
So-
Are those three all represented in those three pieces right there?
Oh, just lost
It's
that.
okay. Oh,
So I would say I didn't see any of those actually, just at that glance before
Yeah.
it disappeared. So we would,
Well, what
And the reason that I ask that is one of the things that I've seen some very successful content areas do when they have multiple standards is they could have all of them, for example, and then highlight or underline the ones that they're going to focus on in that unit of instruction,
Uh-huh.
right? Where that score 2 content, so it is very specific to that unit. And then how they're going to apply that at score 3 is then tied directly to one of those specific areas, right? Does that make sense? So you wouldn't necessarily assess them every time in an interpretive
right,
per se.
right.
It may be a different way to show that so that you're covering those standards. Does that make sense? That was the only thing that I was going to ask.
Absolutely. And
with
I
that.
think that probably isn't as clear in their scales as it would be if you had their units of instruction right alongside with this.
Right.
Because it's through the activities and the assignments that they give that you learn the specific focus, whether it's presentational, interpretive, or interpersonal. Because do you experts agree that any one of those could be the focus of identifying phrases related to likes and dislikes and using those phrases? It could be presentational, it could be interpretive, it could be interpersonal. Do you agree with that?
yeah,
No?
you don't, because I do. I think it could.
I hear a yes and a no.
Because I think,
Well,
yeah, I mean, because you're going to need to apply a correct sentence structure using the concept practice, whether you're presenting, interacting interpersonally, or interpreting. So I would say, yeah, and you have, on the second one, apply relevant vocab, correct form in sentences. If you're presenting, interacting with another, or interpreting, you still need to apply the relevant vocab. So, but I think what Shad's going to say no is because those aren't, while those are, we would actually put those score 3 things would be our score 2.
To apply at score 2?
The correct sentence structure.
Well, what we do
Well,
is,
no, that's
what we
not.
do is we take
I
the
was going
can
to
do
say,
statement.
that's
No.
pretty higher order thinking. There,
Yeah,
'cause
I
they've
wouldn't
gotta
say
learn
that.
all of
I rescind
stuff,
that.
right?
Yeah, that would not be.
Well, what we do is we do what we're trained to do. You unwrap the standard,
Uh-huh.
and the unwrapped standard is your 3.
Okay.
Or am I?
Nope, keep going. You're on track.
So, and in your book you talked about multi-dimensional standards.
Sure.
And that seems to be the problem, and there's just so what we try to do is make it clear, like what your book says.
Uh-huh.
They want clear standards, fewer standards, higher order thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know, in when I read the literature, it says that having multi-dimensional is the antithesis of the standards. Because you can't really make it crisp and clear their proficiency on the standard.
So would you consider what they have here to be multidimensional?
Yes, very.
And I would disagree with you, and
Okay.
here's why. Because what they have here is 3 learning targets. Each of those learning targets, I believe, is unidimensional or single idea statements. So the first one is apply correct sentence structure using the concept practice. The second thing is apply relevant vocabulary in the correct form in sentences. And the third is use correct grammar required by the concept practice. So they have 3 single idea learning targets there. So if I was to assess a student, through the use of an exit slip. I could just give them a little half slip of paper that asks them to do that last learning target within score 3. That's all I could assess, perhaps. I could also give an assessment over the entirety of a score level on this scale. And if my assessment items relate explicitly to one of those learning targets, I could give the student 3 scores. Because I could say, you are able to apply correct sentence structure and to apply the relevant vocabulary, but on this particular assessment, you got a score 2 on using correct grammar required. You had some challenges in that. So I could give them that kind of feedback. Even though there are 3
Yeah, 'cause that's the
learning
most
targets
important
on
thing.
this scale, they're each 3 single idea statements. Does that make sense to you? Don't
Sort of.
feel like you have to have only one learning target at score 3 on a scale. You can, but oftentimes there are related learning targets that we teach during a single unit of instruction. Okay, so in other words, why would I separate those out on different proficiency scales? When as I teach a unit of instruction, I'm addressing this, and I'm addressing this, and I'm addressing this. So it's okay to have multiple targets on the same scale. Just to your point, don't keep them in a big lump of text. Delineate those learning targets as single
Right.
idea statements.
So I would see that as 3 separate assessments that you need to do. To point out each one of those.
Could. I don't think it would be necessary though. Could you not have a few items where kids are assessed on the first target, part A? Part B, you assess the targets on the second. You assess the second learning target. Part C, you assess the third learning target. All one single assessment. But I have part A, part B, part C to represent the 3 learning targets at score 3. I mean, there's lots of different ways you can go about that. You can have a single assessment for a single learning target, but that becomes a pretty significant challenge when it comes to helping kids understand the relationship across all of that. This isn't the right way to go about it, it's just an example, but
Yeah, we would do it a little bit different. So we could give them, looking at the student, I think they would be a little bit confused on the feedback.
it's
But
all
that-
about how we teach them,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
So, I don't know, I just,
Pull one of yours up and let's talk to one of yours.
Okay.
Okay, let's do that. Here, I'll trade places with you.
where's our,
Go to the shared drive. You have them in there, don't you?
I don't know, we've got some few.
So how many proficiency scales would you say you have for a course? Spanish 1, French 1,
I think it was like 18. I came up with German.
okay,
Because I just took the unwrapped the candy statements,
okay.
and then I can give very specific feedback to each part of the, it says like explain or describe or.
And that can work, it can. Okay, do you wanna project there?
Oh.
So I can give you some feedback by all of us looking at the same thing.
How much time do we have left? About 10 minutes?
Oh, we need to hardly there. Well, we want to discuss one other, one art. It was the top priority in our thing.
Okay. And if
9:54.
About 15 minutes.
15
Okay,
minutes.
we're-
Okay.